Just going to run this dog to see if we can find any type of human remains that are left.
Listen to Where Secrets Go to Die, The Disappearance of Derek Hennigan. From the Detroit Free Press, a new podcast set in the woods of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Available on Apple, Spotify, Freep.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, the BuckeyeXtra podcast with Rob Aller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Welcome back to the BuckeyeXtra football podcast. It's February 20th. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by my co-host, Bill Rabinowitz. Ohio State has now a completed coaching staff. Last week, I believe it was Thursday, they hired James Laurinaitis, promoted him from a graduate assistant to a full-time linebackers coach, finalized what they were doing with the 10th position coach. Laurinaitis talked with reporters today on Tuesday. So did Matt Guerrieri, who was hired last month as the safeties coach. Those are two out of the three new hires. We did not get to hear from Chip Kelly, but now we, I think, get a chance to assess the whole staff together.
Yeah, we kind of split it up. They talked at the same time. I was with Laurinaitis and you were with Guerrieri, so I'll talk about Laurinaitis. He said this was a dream job. Look, he's a three-time All-American at Ohio State. This made all the sense in the world for him to be hired officially as the linebackers coach. He handled a lot of those duties last year. Jim Knowles delegated that to him. Technically, linebackers are Jim Knowles' position, but he's the defensive coordinator, and so he felt that Laurinaitis was qualified to handle it. But as Laurinaitis said, there's a difference between coaching the linebackers and being the linebackers coach. First of all, you can be a full-time recruiter. And secondly, you don't have to hear on the recruiting trail that, well, he's not going to be there long as he's not technically an assistant coach. And, if you look at what Brian Hartline did as a former Buckeye, and, Laurinaitis was a better player at Ohio State than Hartline was. Not that it matters in this, but Laurinaitis is even a bigger legacy as an Ohio State player. And if he can do anything like what Brian Hartline has done with the receiver group, man, oh man, I mean, that's a home run hire. Because as Ryan Day said, look, recruiting's more than half the battle. And I would imagine with Laurinaitis' personality, he's a very outgoing guy, that he would be very effective as a recruiter.
Just going to run this dog to see if we can find any type of human remains that are left.
Listen to Where Secrets Go to Die, The Disappearance of Derek Hennigan. From the Detroit Free Press, a new podcast set in the woods of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Available on Apple, Spotify, Freep.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It's an interesting move, largely, I think, in this way that they went with the hiring a defensive assistant with Laurinaitis. In the last few years, they've had a dedicated special teams coach. With this hire, I think it gives two things. One, it gives Ohio State an extra recruiter on the road, especially in the defensive side of the ball. It allows Jim Knowles to have maybe more of a 10,000-foot view than he had before, even with the defensive side of the ball, because he was coaching that position group last year with the linebackers. And now you have 5 defensive assistants, 5 offensive assistants, a little more balanced than what they've had in previous years because of the way they configured the coaching staff. They had 4 defensive assistants last year, 5 offensive guys, and a special teams coach.
Yeah, I mean, it was clear that they were going to hire a defensive coach because Ryan Day is also an offensive coach, so it's really 6 on the offensive side of the ball. Mm-hmm. The surprise really was that it took so long for them to kind of hand Laurinaitis the job. Maybe there was no reason to until he had to. But, I think about Laurinaitis' career, and he was a guy who, older Ohio State fans remember, he became like an accidental player in a way. He was a under-the-radar 3-star recruit from Minnesota. As a freshman, he was a backup. And then Bobby Carpenter got hurt early in the Michigan game that year. And here comes this guy whose name nobody can pronounce and sounds like a disease, right? And he played really well. And it was like, oh, where did he come from? And then you find out, his background. He's, his father's the wrestler and all this stuff, a great backstory. And then he became a 3-time All-American and had a very successful pro career, mostly with the St. Louis Rams. And then he said this was interesting. He talked about this. After he retired, his body kind of gave out. It's, the NFL's obviously brutal on your body. And when he realized he couldn't play anymore, it's like, okay, what do I do now? And there were about 8 months there where he wasn't sure. And he got into radio, and it was good on the radio here, local talk show, but he got that itch and realized I'm a football guy at heart. I want to be in the trenches with these guys, and became a GA at Notre Dame, and then came here last year. And he's a very personable guy. If you talk to James Laurinaitis, he's very down to earth. He's very friendly. I can see how when he's in a living room with parents and recruits, how he'd be very, very effective. Because as he said, he doesn't kind of have to read from a script like a car salesman. He can just tell, his story is his testimony. And I would imagine that'd be pretty powerful when you're talking to 16, 17-year-old guys, and he can say, hey, I wasn't necessarily a 5-star guy, but I worked really hard and took advantage of my opportunity, and you can do the same thing.
His career path is eerily similar to Brian Hartline's, where you could play, former Ohio State player, play 5, 6, 7+ years in the NFL. I mean, a good NFL career. You retire. You aren't really sure what you're going to do. You played long enough in the NFL where you've made enough money where you don't have to go into coaching. Brian Hartline also started out in radio, didn't really do the number of years that Laurinaitis did. I mean, Laurinaitis had his own show on The Fan for several years and was a co-host with Bo Bishop in the morning. Hartline just did a little bit of it, but they're both the same age, 37 years old, and sort of just fall into coaching at their alma mater. It's an interesting staff makeup and background from that perspective, because you go Hartline and Laurinaitis, 2 alums who are the same age, 37, and you also have Tim Walton, who also played at Ohio State and one of their better position coaches, maybe one of the best position coaches on staff right now, with the way he can recruit and the way that the corners played last year. 3 out of the 10 guys are former Buckeye players, which I would be interested to know the last time they've had as many alums as they do coaching at Ohio State.
Well, if Laurinaitis can recruit anywhere close to the way that Walton and Hartline have recruited and developed their players, it's a home run hire. It's it just makes all the sense in the world. Well, you talked to Matt Guerrieri. What were your impressions of him?
Sharp, smart guy. I mean, I remember when Jim Knowles first got here 2 years ago, and you talked to people around Jim Knowles. Matt Guerrieri was one of the guys I had talked to for a profile of Jim Knowles, and people also had good things to say about Matt Guerrieri as well. When I talked to David Cutcliffe, he thought Matt Guerrieri was a bright, young, up-and-coming assistant coach, and I think he's only 34 years old, I believe. So he I think is coming up pretty quickly in this profession. A lot of the years he spent, he is 34. A lot of the years he spent in coaching have been around Jim Knowles. 7 of the 13 have been at Knowles. Most of those were at Duke. Knowles hired him as a GA, promoted him, and then when Knowles left to go to Oklahoma State, that allowed Guerrieri to sort of ascend on that staff. He became a coordinator there. So a lot of familiarity with the Knowles system, and I think it maybe gives Ohio State some more knowledge and background as they maybe try to evolve and add stuff in year 3. He was here in 22 as well. He was as an analyst as part of the staff during the installation. So a lot of the guys know him. Guys like Lathan Ransom, Sonny Styles, some of the guys who'll be coaching in that safety room have met Matt Guerrieri as well. I think, too, the thing that's sort of interesting about his time already, he's only been here a month, but he was hired in January. His second day on the job, he flew down to Atlanta to recruit Caleb Downs. And the following day, Caleb Downs commits to Ohio State. So he got thrown into the fire right away and already got one pretty critical recruiting win. Yeah, I mean, he replaces Perry Eliano. And Perry, I feel bad for Perry because Perry did a good job. I think he's highly regarded. But it was, Brian Day and or Jim Knowles probably both wanted kind of his guy, Knowles' guy, to help but help coach the defense. And the
safeties played well last year. The secondary played very well last year. So, I do feel bad for Perry Eliano, but coaching is going to be a ruthless business. It's, you get paid a lot of money, and, it's a good job in a lot of ways, but you work a lot of hours and there's no job security at all. And, look, they walk into this profession knowing that that's the way it is. I don't know that there's been a staff that stayed together, like the whole 9-10 guys, however many it was that year, for more than a year or two. I mean, it's just really hard to do that these days with the coaching changes and the musical chairs that happens when there are job openings. And so, but you look at the whole staff now. Now we know what the whole staff is, and you go, okay, this looks like compared to last year's staff. Would you rather have Chip Kelly or Corey Dennis? No offense, Corey Dennis, but Chip Kelly's got a resume that is a mile long. You look, James Laurinaitis versus, well, he really replaces, if you want to look at it that way, Parker Fleming. So, that's I would think an upgrade. I think that Ryan Day probably feels very good about the staff right now. Obviously, you had the big hiccup with Bill O'Brien coming and going very quickly, but I don't want to call Chip Kelly a plan B. I don't think that's a plan B at all. I think it was probably a plan A that nobody thought would actually happen. But you look at the staff and the way that Day's got to feel, comfort level with the staff. I think he feels very good about Jim Knowles right now. He obviously feels very good about Chip Kelly. The two guys that are still on the staff that I had questions whether they'd be around at the end of last year were Larry Johnson and Tony Alford. Well, if recruiting is half the battle, they nailed it with what they did. The famous Edric Houston phone call during the middle of signing day pretty much ensured that Larry Johnson would come back, and he got an extension. He got 2 years. And Tony Alford not only keeps Travion Henderson, but he got Quinshon Judkins to come from Ole Miss. And so he looked at last year and you think, who's going to play running back for them next year? If Travion leaves, and now you look at they might have the best. They probably do have the best duo in the country. So we've talked about this before, Joey, that this looks like the year where they're saying we're going to go for it. And if Will Howard can be the quarterback that they think he can be, the defense is loaded after playing very well last year. Caleb Downs, you could make a case he might be their best player on that defense. And the key, of course, we always talk about the offensive line. We'll talk about that plenty in the future. But assuming the offensive line is better, and I think it will be better, this looks like a really, really good team.
Yeah, I think of all the changes they made, Chip Kelly is certainly the splashiest one. I think the other thing to maybe keep an eye on is just how the defense evolves now that Jim Knowles is sort of freed up from being able to now no longer he's just solely the linebackers coach, but just simply the defensive coordinator, which means you could be involved in multiple rooms on that side of the ball. And you look at his track record at each stop that there's been gradual improvement year in and year out. And what they did last year at Ohio State was try to simplify a lot of stuff, a lot of back to the basics, which led to a big effort to not give up the big plays. And now that you have so much experience on that defense, familiarity with Knowles' system, you're bringing another guy, McInerney. You have Knowles sort of taking even more of a big picture look. I'll be curious to see sort of what maybe new changeups or curveballs they add in, because it seems like you would free up Knowles a lot more to do some of that stuff. And they were really good last year at not giving up the explosive plays, but at times it felt like maybe they were a defense that needed to create some more takeaways, havoc plays, things like that. So that'll invite all sorts of questions this offseason about the wrinkles they'll throw in. Will we ever see the jack at some point in time surface? The sort of an offseason curiosity, if anything, at this point, Knowles' hybrid defensive and linebacker spot. So a lot of intrigue with some of the way the defense could maybe evolve as their staffing is picked up there.
Yeah, other than the offensive line, and even then, I think we could probably name the 5 starters, or at least 4 of them. But we don't know exactly where they're going to play necessarily. Look, it's going to be Josh Simmons at left tackle and Donovan Jackson at left guard, and I would assume Seth McLaughlin at center. And the question is, does Josh Fryer move from tackle to guard, and how that works there? But you look at the rest of the team, really, and on defense, you almost could name all 12 starters. There's, I guess, some question as to whether C.J. Hicks will start alongside Cody Simon at linebacker. I would think he would, but Gabe Powers will have something to say about it. He's got to earn a spot, but C.J. Hicks is a 5-star guy, and people have spoken highly of him. Laurinaitis said today he just wants to see him kind of cut loose and play with more consistency. He didn't get many snaps last year, and so that's somewhat of a question, but I'd rather have a question about a guy like C.J. Hicks than some 3-star guy that had never played before, and you wonder if he's up to it. I mean, I think C.J. Hicks is one of those guys that just needed his chance, and now he's got it, and he's got to seize it.
The other question will be whether Sonny Styles will be competing for snaps alongside C.J. Hicks. I think it's highly likely that Cody Simon will be the middle linebacker. But the question is, who's the other linebacker to pair with him on the weak side? And they're open to switching positions for Sonny Styles, but you hear Ryan Day talk about it. You hear Matt Guerrieri, you hear James Laurinaitis all talk about it. No one's really committed either way. They're sort of keeping the doors open. The interesting comparison that Laurinaitis brought up today was Isaiah Simmons, who folks might remember a few years ago at Clemson, was sort of a jack-of-all-trades guy, played linebacker, played safety, lined up in the slot, did a lot for them. That's the player that Laurinaitis compared Styles to, and there's some merit in terms of all the stuff he did. Look, last year he played some nickel corner, which meant he was involved in slot coverage, dropped down the box a fair bit. When Lathan Ransom got hurt, he played some of that boundary side, the strong safety spot. So I think they could use him for several different things next year, and maybe one of those is linebacker. I think what I'm curious about is whether it'll be truly a situation where they say he's staying in safety or he's moving to linebacker and he'll be there full time, because I could certainly envision a scenario where he ends up maybe doing some of both, where he ends up cross-training at both positions and they keep some flexibility there in terms of what he can do rather than just locking him into one spot. But he certainly has the size to play linebacker. He's 6'4", 230 pounds. And you look at his long-term future, especially how young he is. He's only 19 years old going into his junior season. He might very well be a linebacker down the road. But as far as where he fits in on this defense, he could end up being it's truly like Laurinaitis said, sort of an Isaiah Simmons type versatility.
Yeah, you wrote about that today. I wrote about Laurinaitis. Check it out at dispatch.com. Joey wrote about Sonny Styles possibility, also dispatch.com, obviously. Any other stories you've written that you'd like to talk about?
No, those were our immediate stories out of today.
Yeah. I did
unless you want to talk about the Dayton Flyers, but I'm guessing people to.
Well, we should talk about the Dayton Flyers. There's a good basketball team in this state.
And you wrote about it.
I did write about it. The Dayton Flyers I'm from Dayton, as some of you know, and so Dayton basketball is a big deal in Dayton. It's kind of their Ohio State football in terms of the game that the team that people care about. So anyway, I wrote about that. I hope people also read the story I wrote about Ross Bjork last week. Kind of his, I don't know what the right word is. Checkered. I don't know if that's the right word, but he had some.
I think baggage is probably the fair word. Some stints in his past, that some controversial episodes that he was a part of at Mississippi, and then later on at Texas A&M. You wrote about some of the stuff at Ole Miss. Yeah,
so I hope people had a chance to read that, and it was an involved story. I'll say that. He's expected to be hired officially, but approved by the Board of Trustees. I believe tomorrow. I believe Wednesday is the day that's going to happen. Possibly Thursday, but I think it is. I think it's tomorrow, Wednesday. So, and then he will officially start March 1st as kind of a transitional advisory role or whatever, more like a apprenticeship kind of in a way, until Gene Smith retires. And as you know, Chris Holtman was fired last week, and Bjork is going to probably be in charge of that hiring. with help from Gene. Anyway, we're getting off of our beat. Let's get back to football or wrap it up here. It's kind of a quiet time. If there's a quiet time for Ohio State football, this is supposed to be it.
Yeah, don't jinx it because I'm about to go on a little take some time off. I think the other takeaway from this makeup of the coaching staff, it's the first time in Ryan Day's tenure that he has not had a assistant on staff whose primary responsibility is coaching special teams, which is what he had the last 3 years with Parker Fleming, his first 2 years with Matt Barnes. He's going to deviate from that, where he's not going to have a full-time special teams coach. It'll likely be a sort of a by committee approach where a couple guys will be involved. Matt Guerry confirmed he'll be involved, but they haven't really gone and delineated things. Ryan Day will probably have a larger hand in special teams itself. It's an interesting change, just because that's the way he's structured it. But you look at the top teams that are competing for the college football playoff. I was just going through the final AP poll from last year. Ohio State and Ole Miss were the only two teams in that top 10 who had assistants whose only job was special teams. All the other schools had special teams coordinators, but they had another position group that they were also responsible for. Ole Miss and Ohio State, two were the exceptions to that, which I thought was notable. Georgia also didn't have they had a special teams coordinator who was part of their support staff, which wasn't even part of the on-field staff. So I think Ohio State, what they're doing on special teams is probably right now more in line with what is in vogue in college football, not having a full-time special teams coach.
I credit you for doing that research, and I pity you for doing that research.
Didn't take long. Just look at a few staff directories.
Yeah, okay. And sounds like an enjoyable day.
And now our listeners
are informed. Yeah, because
their water cooler or whatever with so much more knowledge. And
the other thing the other little staff change that we should point out, you had just wrote about it. Joe Philbin is leaving. He's going back to the NFL. We knew that was a short-term thing. He wasn't going to stay at Ohio State in a back room kind of deal for long. The guy's a former NFL head coach, so he's going back to the NFL. And he was a help with the offensive line last year. Well, in theory, he was. I'm not sure. I mean, the offensive line would have been a lot worse without him. But anyway, that's at least worth noting.
Yeah, those type of support staff roles, those guys tend to come and go. Paul Rhodes is here for a year or so left. Todd Fitch has stayed for several years now. The other senior advisor analyst on staff, pretty involved with the quarterbacks and helping out Ryan Day with that position group. But it's typically the analysts are sort of a fairly transient role in the coaching industry. So Joe Philbin will be on the move after 9 months. But I think that sort of gives you the latest on the staff and the way things are sort of being configured for next season. We're only 2 weeks out from spring football practice, so we'll get a lot more into seeing what's the latest with the Buckeyes when they actually get onto the field and start breaking stuff down. A lot of familiar faces on defense, but a lot of new faces on offense. New coordinator, new quarterback, new pieces on the offensive line. No more Marvin Harrison Jr. So things will be fun to talk about here. Some more football stuff coming your way soon. Bill is signaling for me to wrap up, but as always, thanks for joining us. Thanks for downloading. Thanks for listening to the Buckeye Extra Football Podcast and subscribing to the Dispatch. Again, we will be back soon to preview spring practice, and Bill will be at the NFL Combine next week, as well as Marvin Harrison Jr. and a few other Buckeye draft hopefuls trying to impress the league scouts and teams in Indianapolis. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Be sure and subscribe to the Buckeye Extra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.
Just going to run this dog to see if we can find any type of human remains that are left.
Listen to Where Secrets Go to Die, The Disappearance of Derek Hennigan. From the Detroit Free Press, a new podcast set in the woods of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Available on Apple, Spotify, Freep.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.